Man, that sunset is gorgeous.
Grill, patio, sunset. Hard to get better than that. Unless you're browsing Carvana's inventory while you soak it all in.
Oh, burger time.
So sit back, get comfortable. Carvana's got thousands of cars under $20,000 just waiting for you.
I could stay here forever.
Carvana, where car buying meets comfort meets convenience. Download the app or visit Carvana.com today.
Hello and welcome to the Monitor Brief. It's March 27th and I'm Kristen Tallman. Today's main story will focus on UNRWA, but let's get you caught up on the headlines. The southern Gaza Strip came under intense Israeli bombardment overnight despite international pressure for an immediate ceasefire. Talks in Qatar towards a truce and hostage release deal involving U.S. and Egyptian mediators have brought no results so far. Israel and the Palestinian militant group Hamas are blaming each other. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin told his Israeli counterpart Gallant Tuesday that civilian casualties in Gaza are too high and suggested alternatives to a major Israeli operation in the territory's south. In Lebanon, Iran-backed Hezbollah movement fired a barrage of rockets into northern Israel Wednesday, killing a civilian, after Israel carried out a deadly strike in southern Lebanon. Turkish President Erdogan secured a long-coveted invitation to the White House and is expected to travel to Washington to meet with President Joe Biden in May. Turkish voters head to the polls Sunday, casting their ballots for a local election. All eyes are on Istanbul and Ankara, two cities currently held by the opposition, but is proving to be a tight race. Saudi Arabia announced that it will participate in the Miss Universe pageant for the first time. And on to the main story. Al Monitor State Department correspondent Elizabeth Hagedorn will join us to give us the latest.
Hi, Elizabeth. Welcome to the Al Monitor Brief. Thanks so much for joining. For our listeners, Elizabeth Hagedorn is Al Monitor's State Department correspondent, and she's one of those reporters where you walk in a room and more people want to talk to her than vice versa, which is always a really good sign with a reporter. Let's just start with, I'd love to understand, who is UNRWA? What does it stand for? What does the agency do? And how did it come into the spotlight?
Sure, Kristen, and thanks for the introduction. Well, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, also known as UNRWA, has been around for more than 70 years, and it has a broad mandate to provide essential services like healthcare and education to millions of Palestinian refugees and their descendants, not just in Gaza and the West Bank, but also in several neighboring countries. Most critically, as our audience knows, UNRWA has been a lifeline for Palestinian civilians impacted by Israel's 5-month war in the Gaza Strip. More than 1 million people have taken shelter in UNRWA's facilities since early October. And on top of that, the agency is overseeing food distribution at a time when northern Gaza is said to be at risk of famine, and hundreds of thousands of people are already experiencing crisis levels of hunger. As I'm sure we'll discuss, Israel's allegations that UNRWA employs members of Hamas has really reignited what's been a years-long debate over whether this UN agency is in need of reform or whether it should be defunded and replaced altogether.
Okay. So they help Palestinians both inside Gaza, the West Bank, other neighboring countries, Palestinian refugees. It's been a pressure point in Israel, but now this has been taken to the global stage with some of these allegations. Correct?
That's right. And I can kind of walk you through what some of those allegations are and what UNRWA's response has been. So in late January, the agency fired 10 of its 12 employees that Israel said participated in the October 7th attacks on Israel. The remaining 2 alleged to have participated are dead. In addition, Israel has alleged that roughly 10% of UNRWA's 13,000 employees in Gaza are members of Hamas or other Gaza-based militant groups. Now, I should note that Israeli authorities have not provided journalists with evidence to back up that claim, and UNRWA says it provides the names of its West Bank and Gaza employees to the Israeli authorities who, prior to this war, had not previously objected to them. With that in mind, more than a dozen countries paused their funding to UNRWA after those allegations were made public. That includes the United States, which provides about 30% of UNRWA's annual budget. It suspended funding pending the outcome of the UN's investigations into the alleged UNRWA-Hamas linkage. But some Republicans see this as an opportunity to defund UNRWA once and for all. Over the weekend, President Joe Biden signed into law a $1 trillion budget bill that includes a provision that halts U.S. funding to UNRWA through March 2025. And if President Donald Trump is reelected in November, a resumption of UNRWA funding seems even less likely.
Fascinating. Okay. And U.S. funding for UNRWA is really vital because it's one of the highest amounts, or why is their funding so critical?
Yeah, absolutely. It's accounts for about 30% of UNRWA's budget, roughly $300 to $400 million a year. So you can imagine how the loss of the agency's biggest donor could have catastrophic implications for this agency's survival.
For sure. Talk me through just how aid gets in the interim.
Definitely. Well, everyone from the United Nations to aid groups to this administration has been saying for months now that not nearly enough aid is entering the Gaza Strip, a territory of some 2.3 million people that was impoverished well before this war. So before going into the sort of the issues with the aid response, I should start by saying Israel denies the accusations levied by those aid groups and many progressive lawmakers in Congress that it's denying or restricting aid to Gaza. It blames the backlog on UN agencies that it says are inefficient. But over at the State Department, what we frequently hear is there have been improvements, modest improvements, but more needs to be done on Israel's part to facilitate humanitarian access into Gaza, including by opening up additional entry points and easing what's been a time-consuming and complex inspections process for the trucks trying to bring in aid. Israel has budged on some of this. There's been a slight uptick in the number of trucks entering Gaza this month. And after months of U.S. pressure, Israel did ultimately allow trucks to enter through a land crossing in northern Gaza, where humanitarian needs are greatest right now. But it's clearly it's not enough, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't have the United States and other countries resorting to dropping aid by air and building a temporary port to deliver it by sea. So I guess I would just summarize by saying the amount of aid that's entering Gaza today is really just a drop in the bucket when you consider that we're talking about a population that the UN warns is at risk of famine, disease, and starvation on an unprecedented scale.
Okay, got it. So let's bring us up to kind of the current date. So there's a need for aid. All these measures such as airdrops and, constructing a port is going into action, but there's still the allegations hanging in the air. And from my understanding, the UN is coming out with a report. Can you talk us through just what's this report? When is it expected?
Those are all great questions. There are actually two investigations that were commissioned by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. The first is an internal investigation conducted by a UN office that's looking into the original Israeli allegations about UNRWA employees. The second is an independent probe led by former French Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna. Her team will investigate UNRWA's neutrality and make recommendations on how it can improve, including how it can strengthen its vetting process. The Secretary General has received that team's interim report, and the final report is expected in April. But as far as what this means for UNRWA's future and for donors to come back on board. I think UNRWA officials are really hoping that these investigations, once concluded, will give the holdout donors the reassurance that they need to resume funding.
All right, Elizabeth, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me on, Kristen.
That's it for today's All Monitor Brief. It's March 27th. See you tomorrow.